Hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to continue with Benko Gambit and part 3 of the Benko Gambit lecture. And today's lesson I would like to show you some example from my practice, because Benko Gambit, one of my favorite opponents as a dragon variation in the Sicilian defense, and I play Benko Gambit with the black and also with white, so we can say that I'm playing it with both colors. And of course I know pretty well the idea from the both sides, and just like to show you first of all my experience with Benko Gambit in the Internet Chess Club games. So the games which I played also in the simultaneous exhibition, also in the blitz sessions. And usually my opponents were trying to play or some sidelines or even in the direct lines to start playing some unusual moves. And let's say one of the games continue this way: d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5 and b5. So I played this game with the black pieces. So after c takes b5 and a6, my opponent immediately played knight c3. So this move has different ideas, but knight c3 becomes quite popular something like 30 years ago, when a Soviet Union Grandmaster Igor Zaitsev, well known as the coach of a world champion Anatoly Karpov, find here quite brilliant, amazing idea. So after knight c3, black could play immediately a takes b5, but in that case after e4, b4 and knight b5, black seems like could capture without scaring too much the pawn on e4. Unfortunately, this move doesn't work. So after knight takes e4 and queen e2, white is posing a very unpleasant threat. So when black's knight is going away, white just coming with the very brilliant, very nice check, and suddenly this is a checkmate. It's a small checkmate in the Benko Gambit just after 9 moves. So black also cannot support this knight after f7, f5, because white simply plays f3 and knight has to go away. And at the same time, next move, knight d6 check, black is in losing situation, so knight is just gone. So this idea, knight b5, was quite interesting, and a lot of games were playing in that line. So even in the middle of 19th, this line was still quite popular. So black came to conclusion that absolutely necessary in case of knight b5 to play d6, but still white is continues the same tactical ideas. So white is playing like a gambit against the Benko Gambit. So once again white is sacrificing this pawn on e4, and the main idea of the move bishop f4 is just try to push e4 and e5. Still, for black is extremely dangerous to capture the pawn. After knight takes e4 and queen e2, what to do about the knight? So we cannot play bishop f5 because on f3, and if knight goes and knight takes d6, black is losing at least a piece on f5. So of course we cannot capture queen takes d6 because the knight has been protected by the bishop on f4. So all this idea with knight takes d6 with a pin over the e file, quite unpleasant for black. So what to play in that case? Here are many different options black tried. Black tried to play here knight bd7, bishop a6. Black also tried to play g6, but in any case, white is continuing quite strong pressure after e4, e5. And only about 15 years ago, black came with a solution of the problem. So black found here the great resource. Just instead of trying to go for this pawn on e4, black is playing g7, g5, counter-attacking white's bishop on f4. So in case of bishop takes g5, which more or less the only move, because let's consider move like bishop g3 doesn't work. Black is just captured on e4, and after queen e2 and knight takes g3, knight takes d6 is not possible anymore. So white is just losing a pawn. And after bishop takes g5, knight takes e4, black is getting quite strong position. So knight is already captured this pawn on e4. White's bishop has to go away from g5. So black's next move is bishop g7, allowing already king to be freed after a short castling. So knights on b5 stands a bit away from the game, and black is getting quite good position. So only after black finds this strong alternative g7, g5, all the idea with knight c3 becomes less and less popular. And white in generally back to this knight c3 move only rarely these days. Indeed, I decided not to go to any complications and just continue playing the normal game d6. So this allowing white to play e4, but my opponent decided to play more calm. Knight f3, g6, so continue developing all the pieces according to the setup we were studying. So bishop is going to g7. At the right moment, black is opening position on the queen side and creating pressure over the open files A and B. At the same time, continue controlling the center. And my opponent played e3 very calmly. Bishop g7, bishop e2, short castling, a takes b5, so everything is according to plan. White captures knight takes b5, and I just brings in bishop to a6, also very typical moves for the Benko Gambit. So white decided to move the knight back after knight c3. And after queen b6, black is already not allowing white's bishop to be developed. So very typical move, another very classical, typical idea. So black bringing the queen to b6 and pawn on b2 has to be protected. Quite difficult for white to complete his development. Rook b1, bishop takes e2. Queen takes e2, and of course black could continue something like knight bd7 or knight a6, but I already realized that white is planning to play b2 and b3 and then maybe to bring the bishop, fianchet to bishop to b2, trying to maybe in some moment exchange my dark square strong bishop. So according to plan we were studying in our first lecture, for black is really good to exchange not the bishops but the queens, because white's queen is important piece for protection the second rank. So queen a6, the idea which we studied in the first lesson, introduced by American and of course ex-Soviet Union Grandmaster Lev Albert. After queen takes a6, knight takes a6, and a3, black is playing rook f to b8, posing all the pieces towards the white's queen side. White can develop the bishop, bishop d2, but look at this hole on b3, so I immediately bring all my pieces continue attacking on the queen side. So now black is ready to double in the rooks over the b file, and how white has to protect this b2 pawn, extremely difficult. At the same time, white's a3 pawn is the pass pawn, but how can we use it? We almost cannot move this pawn. After rook f to e1 and rook a to b8, white played knight d1, but completely forgot that the d5 pawn at the same time is gone. And once again, black is having all the threats towards the white's pawn on b2, and move like bishop c3, which played my opponent, unfortunately is another blunder. So black just capturing. And only here my opponent realized that the b pawn is pinned, so he cannot capture back the bishop after b takes c3 because rook takes b1. So he resigned in a few moves. Also, when I played this position from the white side, I usually try to play more calm and not to go for very complicated position. So sometimes instead of playing simply knight c3, white, one of the main weapons against the Benko Gambit is just not to accept the sacrifice, but to play b5 and b6. So this move is quite interesting, and I would like just to give you some historic update about what exactly happened. After b takes a6 and let's say g6, knight c3 and bishop takes a6, white tried here many different options, many different setups. So we were looking what would happen in case white is playing knight f3 and the e3. We were looking what happened in case of e4, that white is going to lose the castling right. So one of the most, I would say, classical setups for white is just to bring the knight to f3 and to fan check the bishop after g3, bishop g2 and short castling. Let's say bishop g7, bishop g2, castling short side, castling short side, and knight bd7. And here white is having still extra pawn. Black is going to develop his forces on the similar way. So queen could go to a5 or to b6, rook comes to b8, and black is continue fighting on the queen side. So thanks to the very actively posed bishop on g7. So it's quite difficult for white to reject the black's pieces from these strong positions. So sometimes black is even intending to bring the knight via the e5 square to c4, improving the attack over the queen side. That's why in this position the more correct moves order today after bishop g2 is just first of all to bring the knight to d7, and only after short castling immediately to play knight b6. So black's knight already looking at c4 square. At the same time we are keeping an eye on over the d5 pawn. So white cannot move the queen anymore on c2 because knight d5, and after rook e1, short castling, and e4, black is just bringing his forces into the game. After knight c4, suddenly white's position is not so pleasant. Let's say after queen c2 and knight d7, so white is not controlling e5 square anymore, and black is intending maybe to bring the knight to e5 and then or knight or the bishop to d3. Suddenly white cannot play b3 at all, because look at that bishop. Black is coming with a strong tactical resource here. Queen a5 aiming the c3 knight, and white has no defense at all. So bishop d2 will be eliminated after knight takes d2, and still knight on c3 is gone. After b takes c3 and b takes c4 and queen takes c3, unfortunately white is under completely lost situation. One of the rook is gone in any case. So after queen takes c3 and bishop takes c3, white is losing at least exchange, and forthcoming bishop takes c4 with complete disaster for white side. So in one game I saw that after d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, b5, c takes b5, a6, b takes a6, g6. White decided to develop slightly different way. So to play g3, black is playing bishop takes a6, bishop g2, d6, and instead of developing knight on c3 and on f3, according to what we know, white's main target is try to organize the counterplay in the center. So to play at right moment e4 and e5. Since after knight is coming to f3, e4 doesn't work anymore. So white just cannot castle king after e4. Look at the black's bishop on a6. So white decided to push immediately e4, knight bd7, f4, bishop g7, and knight e2, trying to lock the diagonal. After then, going maybe with the king short castle, and knight comes to c3, and maybe to organize some pressure in the center after f4 and e5. Unfortunately, all this structure with pawns on e4 and f4 only brings black additional dividends. After queen b6, we can realize that for white it is extremely difficult to complete the castling. Look at black's queen. Short castling will be made by knight g4, at the same time attacking the pawn on b2, and the king is under threat. Knight c3 only answer, and c4 check. Suddenly white cannot protect the long diagonal a7 g1, so the d4 square is under black's control, so white cannot play queen d4, not knight d4, because just simply bishop takes d4. And after king h1 and knight f2 check, white has to accept this knight to play rook takes f2, giving exchange for nothing, obviously. And any counter attack like queen a4 will be very fast destroyed after bishop takes c3, b takes c3, queen takes e2. So black is already rook up, bishop a3, and short castling. Queen takes d7. This way game finished. Bishop c8, and white resigned because bishop on a3 is gone. So white has no any chance to save the game with the rook down. So this just examples, a few examples which we studied the last time and this time, show that in many situations black is having just great compensation for the sacrificing pawns. And white started to think how to skip this strong initiative from black side, how to avoid this pressure over my queen side. So after d4, knight f6, c4 and c5, d5 and b5, white decided that probably one of the good strategy in this situation just not to give black this strong compensation after c takes b5 and a6. Instead of capturing this pawn, white looked for different ideas how to sacrifice back a pawn but prevents black's initiative from being developed so fast. I saw here many top players were facing quite serious difficulties after white's move b5, b6. White is sacrificing back the pawn, so it's contra to Gambit Benko. There's control Gambit Benko, so b5, b6 line, one of the most popular way for white to play against the Benko. Let's understand why. First of all, easy to realize that black already cannot use the A file anymore. So white, after playing b5 and b6, also not allowing black bishop to be developed on a6. So black bishop has to go for different diagonals and not so many opportunities on the diagonal c8 and h3. And when black is trying to push the pawn forward, that could weaken quite significantly the light squares, c4, b5, etc. So if white is just simply capturing queen takes b6, after knight c3, white is intending immediately to set strong center after e2 and e4. White's knight is coming also to the game quite easily. White continued finishing its development after bishop e2 and then short castling. So it's quite difficult for black to organize a serious counterplay, and this line become one of the most popular reaction for white against the Benko Gambit. And even today, players like Mickey Adams, the top England grandmaster, and of course the brilliant talent Magnus Carlsen, using the Benko Gambit. Not so easy to find the good reaction after b5 and b6. I would like just to show you a few examples how I played this variation with white pieces. After queen takes b6, knight c3 and d6, knight f3, g6, white plays knight d2, immediately looking towards the key square on c4. So white is going to push in the pawn later on after e4 and bishop e2. So why it's important to play knight d2 early, because if white is pushing the pawn immediately, so we have to be ready for move bishop g4, and black is intending to exchange the light square bishop for the knight, and that knight is not reaching anymore the c4 square. At the same time, we have to remember that white is having slightly better space advantage. So slightly more space in this situation. The pawn on d5 is more aggressive than pawn on d6. So from the rules we were studying in our lectures, we know that when you have the space advantage, try to avoid the exchanging of the pieces. So that is the main reason of the move knight d4, knight f3 to d2 before playing e4. So after knight d2 and bishop g7, e4, short castling, bishop e2. So black is continued developing knight bd7, but you can realize that it's completely different situation from the normal position in the Benko Gambit. So black is only having semi-open file B, and it's quite difficult to create any serious threats over it. So white quite easily could protect the B pawn, even could play b3 in many lines. The great blockading square on c4 is quite strongly preventing black's counterplay on the queen side. At the same time, knight on c4 supports with the bishop on f4, the pressure, white's plan e4, e5, which as we know is the most important in the Benko Gambit. So black has to be very, very careful. Knight c4, queen c7, bishop f4. So white is intending e4, e5 at the right moment, not immediately, but knight b6, black is trying to exchange this nasty knight on c4, but of course white is allowing, playing just simply knight e3, knight fd7, short castling, bishop b7, and we can realize that how ugly All black pieces are situated now. So it's not so much counterplay like in the classical standard position in the Benko Gambit. So after knight f3, knight fd7, short castle bishop b7, white is just pushing a4, intending to take even more space after a4 and a5. So black hardly ever could stop it, because after a5, as I said before, b5 square becomes just real weakness. And white could bring the piece on, let's say, knight to b5 immediately, or bishop to b5. Look where now black's counterplay on the queen side. Black is having no counterplay on the queen side at all. So after a4, knight a5, a5, knight b to d7, queen c2, rook a to b8, b3. So white is fixing the position of pawns on the queen side, so black cannot play c4 and knight c5 anymore, and I would say black is out of counterplay. So look how he finished this game. After bishop a8, bishop g3, and rook b4, black suddenly forgot that knight has no moves at all. Just I played simply f2 and f4, and black has to resign. The knight is trapped. All this happened because space advantage. White is having space advantage, so black pieces are overreading each other. So both knights are looking on the same square d7. The bishop is very passive, locked by white's pawn on d5. This bishop on g7 is not playing anymore. No targets on the queen side at all, so white is having just full domination and full control over the center squares. One of my games continue in this position. So after knight c4, queen c7, short castle, and one of my opponent played here immediately bishop b7. Bishop f4 and rook f to b8, trying to relocate all the black's pieces. So rook comes to b8, maybe bishop now comes back to b8, from b8 to c7, and then maybe black is trying to start pushing pawns on the queen side, creating some counterplay on there. What do we do? Rook c1, a5, b3, bishop a6, a4. Still looking toward this b5 square. After rook b4 and queen c2, rook a to b1, rook b1. Black pieces only looks more actively posed, but this rook has to go home very soon. And the pawn on a5 could become quite serious weakness in the black's camp. After bishop takes c4, bishop takes c4, and knight g4, white simply played knight b5. That is the biggest problem of movement of this pawn from a6 to a5, that white is taking the full control over the b5 square. Queen b7 and bishop d2, black just lost exchange without any compensation. So position becomes just very, very difficult. My opponent played here for a while after knight g to e5, bishop takes b4, c takes b4, and bishop e2, rook c8. But the compensation is not enough, of course. So white just played queen d2, knight c5, f3, protected all the pawns. So now white is having quite good pawn chain, and in a few more moves after h6, king h1, king h7, and rook f to c1, slowly, but with a full confidence, white realize his material advantage. Bishop f6, knight d4, so now looking to the c6 square, knight e to d7, knight c6, bishop c3, queen f4, attacking the pawn on f7, knight f6, g3, rook f8, king g2, so white is improving position step by step. Black cannot do much. Knight h5, queen e3, e6, and after f4, black cannot improve his position so easily. So knight on coming to a5. At the same time, white is threatening bishop takes h5, e4, e5. So black decided that it's too much to continue this game. It's no any real chance to continue fighting and resigned. So this game once again shows that, let's say, the position after a 15 moves b3, white is having the full control over the center and on the queen side as well, and ready to push e4, e5 at right moment. So, if this b6 line is so strong, so good, is it possible to make to play something against it? Maybe some other counter gambits we can find here in this situation after c takes b5, a6 and b6. So this is quite interesting question, and I would like to continue on our next session, the lesson number 4. I would like to explain you what way Garry Kasparov played this position with black, and how I find here the quite serious improvement for black, which completely changed the evaluation of the whole line after b5 and b6. Thank you very much for watching today's lesson, and today was the part number 3 of the Benko Gambit. So follow me on the part number 4 about the Benko Gambit next week. If you have any question, you can contact me on www.chesslessons.wordpress.com. So leave me a message or send a question. See you next time. Bye.